Well, Shabbat Shalom and welcome to Return the Remnant. Today, I thought I would switch gears a little bit. We've been in our Revelation series. A couple weeks ago, we ended in Revelation 13, and I thought it would be a good idea for this week to talk about the rise and fall of the Antichrist. How does the Antichrist get to the power that he obtains in Revelation 13 at the full strength of his power? And so I thought today we're going to go through a few chapters in the book of Daniel, Daniel 2, Daniel 7, Daniel 8, and Daniel 11. And for the sake of time, I'm going to go in and I'm only going to go through pertinent scripture verses that pertain, in my opinion, what I think is describing the Antichrist. And so I have some notes here, and I thought I'd go through the notes. We'll read some of these verses, and then I have a short PowerPoint where I kind of put it all together. I'm more of a visual guy, so hopefully it will all make sense when we get done. So let's start off with Daniel chapter 2. For many of you who have read Daniel, understand parts of Daniel, this is Nebuchadnezzar's dream where he sees the statue. And so Daniel is now come before Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and has given him the prophecy concerning his dream that the Lord gave to Daniel to give to the king. So let's start off in Daniel 2:31, and we'll read to the end of the chapter, and then I'll share some notes and insight on it. So Daniel comes before the king and says, "You, O king, saw and behold a great image." This great image, so he's describing the dream that Nebuchadnezzar saw. This great image that you saw, Nebuchadnezzar, whose brightness was excellent, stood before you, and the form thereof was terrible or dreadful. This image's head was of fine gold, his breast and his arms of silver, his belly and his thighs of brass, his legs of iron, his feet part of iron and part of clay. You saw till that a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon his feet, that were of iron and clay, and broke them to pieces. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broken to pieces together, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away, and no place was found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. This is the dream, and we will tell the interpretation thereof before the king. You, O king, are a king of kings, for the God of heaven has given you a kingdom, power, strength, and glory. And wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field and the fowls of the heaven have he given into your hand, and has made you ruler over them all. Thou art this head of gold. And after thee shall arise another kingdom inferior to you, and another third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth. And the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron. For as much as iron breaks in pieces and subdues all things, and as iron that breaks all these, shall it break in pieces and bruise. And whereas you saw the feet and toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, but there shall be in it of the strength of the iron, for as much as you saw the iron mixed with miry clay. And as the toes of the feet were part of iron and part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. And whereas you saw iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom, which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. For as much as you saw that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it broke in pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God has made known to the king what shall come to pass hereafter, and the dream is certain, and the interpretation thereof sure. Then the king Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face and worshipped Daniel, and commanded that they should offer an oblation and sweet odors unto him. The king answered unto Daniel and said, Of a truth it is that your God is a God of gods and a Lord of kings, and a revealer of secrets, seeing you could reveal this secret. Then the king made Daniel a great man, and gave him many great gifts, and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon, the chief of the governors over all the wise men of Babylon. Then Daniel requested of the king, and he set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. But Daniel sat in the gate of the king. So we see primarily in Daniel chapter 2, verses 31 to 45, there is a progression, a timeline, if you will. This chapter gives kind of a timeline of kingdoms that basically started during Nebuchadnezzar's time, and scholars generally agree with that. However, when we get to the fourth kingdom, this fourth kingdom that we see, we'll drop it down to verse 40. And the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron, for as much as iron breaks in pieces and subdues all things, and as iron that breaks all these shall it break in pieces and bruise. Now, as I was going through here studying this, one thing that caught my attention that it may have in the past, I don't know. My wife and I read so much and study so much that sometimes there's so much information coming in, and you try to filter all this information that sometimes it's hard to remember. But these 2 feet that contain 10 toes remind me a lot of what we read about in Revelation 13 with the Antichrist when he comes to full power. And he has, basically he is the king over all other of the 10 kings. They all give him power, and he now is in full control over the whole earth. So I believe there's something going on there with the 10 toes being the 10 kings that the Antichrist will be in control of. That is the last, that kingdom of the iron mixed with the clay is the last kingdom, the end days Antichrist kingdom. When it says iron breaks and bruises in verse 40, I find that very, very interesting. And I hold to the Genesis 6 account of fallen angels and the resulting not marriage, but well, you could say unsanctioned marriage between angels and of heaven and women of the earth, and the offspring being giants, being Nephilim. That this could very much be like what 41 says, that the kingdom shall be divided, but there shall be in it of the strength of the iron. Let me see if I can find it here. Yeah, at verse 43, and where you saw iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. And if you want an understanding about that a little bit, go into Enoch and read First Enoch, also Genesis 6. And I think that's kind of one take I get out of that, with the kingdom having the iron and the clay. But then I also see this as clay. Isaiah, it talks about, God's people being the clay and God being, the potter. He's the one that forms the clay. And this could be an analogy of a divided kingdom during the tribulation, when those that are part of iron, so maybe speaking of the Antichrist, having those loyal to him seeking out the clay to destroy. Here's the tribulation of the saints, which could be the clay. So I kind of look at this a little bit as the iron being the sons of darkness and the clay being the sons of light. Maybe not all the clay, but you kind of get an idea on that. Back to verse 43 again with the sons of God theory, the angelic fallen angels. As I said before, that the seed, that they'll mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. There's a place in the Septuagint that I find really interesting. I'd recommend Sir Brenton Lancelot's Septuagint with the English translation. I think it's probably one of the best out there. But if you read the Septuagint in Isaiah chapter 13, primarily verse 3, but I'm going to read you a few verses so you get an idea that this is also end times. The vision which Isaiah son of Amos saw against Babylon, and I believe that this Babylon is the end days Babylon. And if not, it could be a dual prophecy. But when you read some of the verses surrounding it, it seems more like end days. So again, let's go to Isaiah 13. Well, I'll just read it. Isaiah 13, verse 3 in the Sir Brenton Septuagint. Verse 1, the vision which Isaiah son of Amos saw against Babylon. Lift up a standard on the mountain of the plain, exalt the voice to them, beckon with the hand, open the gates, you rulers. I, this is Yah, I give command and I bring them. Giants are coming to fulfill my wrath, rejoicing at the same time and insulting. A voice of many nations on the mountains, even like to that of many nations, a voice of kings and nations gathered together. Yahweh Tsevaot has given command to a warlike nation to come from a land afar off, from the utmost foundation of heaven. The Lord and his warriors are coming to destroy all the world. Howl ye, for the day of the Lord is near, and destruction from God shall arrive. Therefore every hand shall become powerless, and every soul of man shall be dismayed. The elders shall be troubled, and pangs shall seize them as of a woman in travail. And they shall mourn one to another, and shall be amazed, and shall change their countenance as a flame. For behold, the day of the Lord is coming, which cannot be escaped, a day of wrath and anger, to make the world desolate, and to destroy sinners out of it. So I believe that this is an end day scripture, a passage that Yahweh gave to Isaiah. And I believe it has something to do with this last beast kingdom with the 10 toes and how there is the iron mixed with the clay. So anyway, beat that enough. Let's continue. Verse 44. And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. That kingdom is when he sends Yeshua, his only begotten son. And the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. So this is the interpretation, verse 44, of what the king saw in verse 34. You saw till that a stone was cut without hands, so not human, from the heavens. And that stone in Hebrew is Eben. So it is a combination of Av, Father, and Ben, Son. This is speaking of Yeshua. He is the stone that was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon his feet that were of iron and clay, and broke them to pieces. And isn't that interesting? Because this whole thing about the stone crushing and destroying the enemy is a culmination of the whole seed war that we get back in Genesis 3:15. So that's what I see in Daniel 2. This gives us a little backdrop into the kingdoms leading up to the end day kingdom. So let's scroll ahead now and let's go to, Daniel 7. Now, Daniel was given interpretations of visions of these 4 beasts. So if you have time, you can pause it and read the first 15 verses. I'm going to start in verse 16. And this is when he gets an interpretation of his vision. So we have a son of man and a couple messengers of Yah, and he's going to talk to them, whether it's Yeshua or an angel, I don't know. But starting in verse 16 of Daniel 7, and I believe going to the end of the chapter. So Daniel says, I came near unto one of them that stood by and asked him the truth of all this, of the vision that he saw. And so he told me, made me know the interpretation of the things. These great beasts, which are 4 kings which shall arise out of the earth. But the saints in the Most High shall take the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever. So there's the whole snippet right there. Something's going to happen. Antichrist is going to rise to power. But then in the end, no matter what, in the end, the saints are going to take the kingdom. Yeshua will be our king in the millennial kingdom. Verse 19, then I would Then I would know the truth of the fourth beast, which was diverse from all the others, exceeding dreadful, whose teeth are of iron and his nails of brass, which devoured broken pieces and stamped the residue with his feet. And of the 10 horns that were in his head, and of the other which came up, and before whom 3 fell, even of that horn that had eyes and a mouth that spoke very great things, whose look was more stout or more strong than his fellows. I beheld, and the same horn made war with the saints and prevailed against them, until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was given to the saints of the Most High, and the time came that the saints possessed the kingdom. Thus he said, so again, speaking to Daniel, the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom upon the earth, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down and break it in pieces. And the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise, and another shall rise after them, and he shall be diverse from the first, and he shall subdue 3 kings. And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws, and they shall be given into his hand until a time and times and the dividing of time. So here's your time, and half a time, 42 months, 1260 days. But the judgment shall sit, and they shall take away his dominion to consume and destroy it unto the end. And the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. Hitherto is the end of the matter. As for me, Daniel, my cogitations much troubled me, and my countenance changed in me, but I kept the matter in my heart. So a lot of scholars look at these section of verses and they look at it more as a timeline, that this kingdom has come and gone, and then another kingdom has come and gone, and another kingdom has come and gone until we get to this fourth kingdom. However, I believe there are some issues with that theology there. Let's talk about it. I believe that all 4 of these kingdoms are going to be on the earth at the same time. And bear with me on that, because as we get into the PowerPoint and I sum all this up in some visual aids, you'll get an idea what I'm talking about. But when the Antichrist starts to come to power, there are basically going to be 4 kingdoms on the earth at the same time. And in this fourth kingdom that the Antichrist is going to come out of, there will be 10 kings within this kingdom. He will subdue those kings, and he will obtain 1/4 of the earth's power. And I believe during the seals, he is going to, through deceit and intrigue, which is, I believe, is the first seal, through famine and through wars, the second and third seal, and then through death and Hades, if you will, because it talks about 1/4 of the earth being destroyed. He will have 1/4 of the earth at that time until he is finally given that full power from everyone. And that's what we see in Revelation 13. But there's something that has to happen. And this is why, there's people out there that think the cough, that happened a couple of years ago. That was the first seal. And because it looked like a crown and this and that. And we can all have our opinions on it. I don't see it. I believe that the world has to change first. Maybe, we're seeing, just lately, I've been watching a lot of stuff on a lot of economic uncertainties. And I won't get into details, but if you look at the derivatives market, if you look at how much nations, including ours, are in debt, there's something that has to change. And it could be a whole economic meltdown. It could be war. Take your pick. But I believe that something has to happen first before we get to this point of 4 kingdoms on the earth. So I have in my notes here that there is a dividing of the world into 4 parts before the Antichrist even begins his rule. And this is why I say I think there's a lot of signs out there. People, there's several places in Scripture that say people who are wise, we study scripture, we try and learn these things, and we get a jump on these things. And we see things that happen within our time domain before the masses see it, and it can help you get yourself ready to be able to see events taking shape, as we read about, in Daniel and in Revelation and other places. And as I said before, the Antichrist will take control of the fourth kingdom, which has the 10 rulers. He eventually will conquer all four kingdoms through false peace, famine, and war, and rules, and will rule the entire world. And right there is your first four seals. Those are the first four seals, because the fifth seal is the tribulation, the martyrdom of the saints. And so I believe that all four kingdoms on earth are at the same time. A couple reasons why. Number one, we read about later that the three kings that were subdued, it says that they are going to be allowed to live, that they're going to be allowed to live. Also, when we read Revelation 13, what does it say? It talks about this beast coming out of all the nations, all the peoples. And he describes the beast, that the beast has characteristics of a leopard, of a lion, and of a bear, which means that those kingdoms had to be existing at the time that the Antichrist rose to power. So, and you'll see a visual of that too, get you a little bit idea of my thought process. So now, chapter 7, we get a little bit of understanding there. Let's go now to Daniel chapter 8. Let's see here. This one is a little bit more difficult passage. I'm going to, again, skip down to around verse 15. This is another vision. This is another vision that Daniel sees. There are areas in here that this could have to do with the old Seleucid king, Antiochus IV, or Antiochus Epiphanes, the one we read about in the book of Maccabees. But I'm going to start in Daniel 8, verse 15, until the end of this chapter. And it says, "And it came to pass, when I, Daniel, had seen the vision and sought for the meaning, then behold, there stood before me as the appearance of a man." So he's seeing another similar type of thing when he's going to get an understanding of the vision. He sees an angel, possibly Yeshua, who's going to give an interpretation for him. "And I heard a man's voice between the banks of the Ulai, which called and said, Gabriel, make this man to understand the vision. So he came near where I stood, and when he came," so here's Gabriel, the angel, going to talk to Daniel. "And when he came, I was afraid, and I fell upon my face. But he said unto me, Understand, O son of man, for at the time of the end shall be the vision." So right there, what we read about, this cannot be, at least starting at this point, this cannot be anything that we read about in the past. This can't be anything to do with Babylon, a Babylon ruler, or a Seleucid or Ptolemaic empire during the time of the Maccabees. This is now concerning the end, the days we're living in. Let's continue. Verse 18, "Now as he was speaking with me, I was in a deep sleep," probably Tardama in Hebrew, "deep sleep on my face toward the ground, but he touched me and set me upright. And he said, Behold, I will make you know what shall be in the last end of the indignation, for at the time appointed the end shall be." Again, this is another confirmation. This is what's going on to the end. "The ram which you saw having two horns are the kings of Media and Persia, and the rough goat is the king of Greece, or Greece, and the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. Now that being broken, whereas four stood up for it, four kingdoms shall stand up out of the nation, but not in his power. And in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors are come to the full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences or dark sayings shall stand up. And his power shall be mighty." So we're speaking of the Antichrist here. "And his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power." And you can read this later, that Satan gives him the power and authority that we read about in Revelation 13. And he shall destroy wonderfully and shall prosper and practice and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people. Well, we know in Revelation 13, he's given authority to overcome the saints for a short period of time, 42 months. And through his policy also he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand, and he shall magnify himself in his heart, and by peace shall destroy many. He shall also stand up against the prince of princes, but he shall be broken without hand. And the vision of the evening and the morning, which was told, is true. Wherefore shut up the vision, for it shall be for many days. And I, Daniel, fainted and was sick for many days. Afterward, I rose up and did the king's business, and I was astonished at the vision, but no one understood it. So again, I have one of the key verses was back in verse 19. It's going to be at the time of the end. So even though the beginning verses of this chapter could have something to do with Antiochus Epiphanes, there is a transition there, and we definitely get an idea of more of the Antichrist in the end days, what's going on. In verse 24, again, all this here, his power he'll have a lot of power, he'll prosper. And you remember there's a part in Revelation 13, who can defeat the power of the beast? Who can make war with him? So we see a connection there, a thematic connection. We also see, and I'll just go to it, Revelation 13. And again, it was given unto him to make war with the saints and to overcome them, and power was given to him. He didn't obtain it. It was given to him by who? The dragon, a.k.a. Satan. Power was given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations. Let's go back. We also see that back in Daniel 7:21. And I beheld, and the same horn made war with the saints and prevailed against them. There's that little horn that came up. Okay, let's keep going here. And in 8:25, and this is something that I don't know. It's something to make you think. I don't know if this is anything or not, but when it says, and through his policy he shall cause craft, he's being deceitful here, doing things deceitfully to prosper in his hand. He's doing some things, and it's cunning and deception, if you want to look at it. And could this verse here relate to something we read about in Daniel 9 about the covenant with many that gets broken? I don't know, and I'm definitely not going to tackle Daniel 9 because there's just too much there, and I don't have an opinion on any of it at this point in time. And let's see. And here it says, but he shall be broken without hand, or broken without human means is another interpretation of the translation. He shall be broken without human means. Okay? Because we know that the Antichrist, unlike all these other kings that rose up, were killed based on, by the sword or whatever, but we know the Antichrist will not be destroyed by any human being, but will be destroyed by the breath of the mouth of Yeshua. And then we have in 8:26, you could say, where Gabriel tells Daniel, seal up the vision, for it shall be for many days, or it can be in the future, or days of the end. So several things here in Daniel 8. I highly encourage you to go and study these, chapter 2, chapter 7, chapter 8, as you're reading Revelation, to get a good flavor. And lastly, we're going to scroll down to Daniel 11. And again, this is another difficult chapter. because this one definitely, the first 30 verses or so definitely can deal with Antiochus Epiphanes, and I think it probably does. But when we get to right around 31, scholars kind of call this transition verses, where it becomes a dual prophecy, and then it can happen in the past and it can happen in the future, and then we get to future. So if we break Daniel up, Daniel 11, we see the past, although Daniel didn't. Daniel saw something in the future, and then there's some transition verses, 30 through 32, 33, and then he sees a far out future prophetic prophecy. So when we read this now, we're reading Daniel 11, we're seeing something in the past, potentially. I'd have to go back and look at this again, but Alexander the Great, maybe the four kingdoms, the kingdoms of the north and south being the Seleucid Empire, which would be, up there in Greece, Turkey, and the southern empire, the Ptolemaic Empire, being Egypt, and these generals who were who fought with Alexander the Great and were given part of his kingdom when he died. In this battle that continued between the north and the south, and who's stuck in the middle, but ancient Israel stuck in the middle where all this battling is going on. And then the king of the north, he gets the upper hand. That's Antiochus Epiphanes later on. And read the book of Maccabees, you get a real good flavor for all that. But we get into these verses 33, 34, 35, which some scholars consider them transition verses, and I tend to agree with this. So I'm going to start there, and I'm going to read to the end of chapter 11, and then you'll get a flavor, especially starting in verse 36. You're going to get a flavor that this is not speaking of Antiochus Epiphanes, but the Antichrist in the end days. I'll start back in 32. And such as do wickedly against the covenant shall he corrupt by flatteries, but the people that do know their God shall be strong and do exploits. And they that understand among the people shall instruct many, yet they shall fall by the sword, by the flame, by captivity, and by spoil many days. Now when they shall fall, they shall be helped with a little help, but many shall cleave to them with flatteries. And some of them of understanding shall fall, to try them, and to purge, and to make them white. So here's a verse that is very, very interesting. Make them white, even to the time of the end. I believe Peter talks about that, and we also know in Revelation about the saints were given white robes, those that were overcomers, or those that were beheaded or martyred in seal 5, to make them white, even to the time of the end, because it is yet for a time appointed. Now we're getting into the Antichrist. I think that was the Antichrist verse 2 in the time of the end, but we're going to start in 36 now. And the king shall do according to his will, and he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished. For that is determined shall be done. Neither shall he regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any god, for he shall magnify himself above all. But in his estate shall he honor the God of forces, and a God whom his fathers knew not shall he honor with gold and silver and with precious stones and pleasant things. Thus shall he do in the most strongholds with a strange God, whom he shall acknowledge and increase with glory. And just to give you the punchline, this strange God, this strange mighty one, because that's what Elohim means, this strange mighty one is HaSatan. HaSatan is the one who is going to help the Antichrist succeed in all that he does. And so he'll acknowledge HaSatan and increase with glory. He shall cause them to rule over many, and shall divide the land for gain. And at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots, with horsemen, and with many ships. And he shall enter into the countries, and shall overflow and pass over. He shall enter also into the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown. So this glorious land is end days Israel. It's going to be, because this is the land flowing with milk and honey that God talks about way back in the days in the Torah with Moshe, and the children who left Egypt wanted to come to the land dripping with milk and honey. This is the glorious land that's being talked about here. But these shall escape out of his hand, Edom, Moab, and Ammon. And where are they located at? Are they located in America? No. Are they located in Australia? No. They are located exactly to the east of the glorious land. This is modern day Jordan and modern day Western Saudi Arabia. This is where Edom, Moab, and Ammon, is the ancient territory located at in modern days. He shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. So these things, when we're looking geographically, this is all happening in the Middle East, with Egypt and with Israel and with parts of Arabia and Syria and Jordan. But he shall have, verse 43, but he shall have power over the treasures of gold and of silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt, and the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall be at his steps. But tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go forth with great fury to destroy, and utterly to make away many. And he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas in the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. So what does verse 45 mean to you? Verse 45 to me means he's going to pitch his tent in Israel. Israel is located between the two seas. Primarily, we're talking Jerusalem here. The Mediterranean Sea to the west, and the Dead Sea, the Sea of Salt, to the east, on the holy mountain, Mount Zion / Jerusalem. This is where he's going to rule and reign. This is where he's going to make himself to be God when he goes up onto the Temple Mount to proclaim himself as a God. Yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. The part when it says in verse 40, the time of the end, that time of the end is also synonymous with the time of trouble, the great tribulation. This is going to be during a time when he is trying to kill off people, and he's going to make his way into Jerusalem, as it says in verse 45, and that is when the martyrdom, seal 5, is going to just go crazy. That's just my opinion. I think also at that point in time, there will also be a war in heaven, Revelation 12. The angels are going to fall to the earth. They're going to make war on the saints. And now Satan's going to give the Antichrist his full power so he can overcome them. A lot of things going on. When it says that he's going to magnify himself above every god, we can also read that when Paul writes about in 2 Thessalonians 2:4. So we have that. Okay, so that gives you a little bit of backdrop. A lot of things we can find in Daniel. Daniel chapter 2, Daniel chapter 7, 8, Daniel 9 has some stuff. I'm only going to touch on that. I could go on a long time there. I don't want to do that. Daniel 11 that we just read about, and even in parts of Daniel 12. So let's get into a short little PowerPoint. And I know I'm 40 minutes in. Give me about 15 more minutes. I think we'll have this wrapped up. So I just titled this The Rise and Fall of the Antichrist. So again, we read Daniel 7 about these 4 great beasts are 4 kings that he saw in the vision. And one of those beasts, it said 10 horns that were on its head, and there was another horn that came up, and before which 3 of them fell. So right now, if there's people out there that think that a certain king of a European country is the Antichrist, or a president, right now, this is going to be someone who's going to come up in the future. And once we see, in my opinion, once we see the world take on a new shape, where there's basically 4 kingdoms, and I'll give you a picture of what I kind of think that's going to look like. One of those kingdoms is going to have 10 kings within that kingdom. Once we start to see that, we are going to know. I think we're going to know very, very soon, as those who study and look at prophecy, to not be deceived. I think we're going to see this very early, before many people will. And because of how we've seen the mainstream media over the past few years, it will be almost impossible to get it out. I think the internet, I think the TV stations, all that is going to be so highly restricted that this kind of information, to those that understand the end days, it will be almost impossible to get it out to many people. That's just my opinion on that. Or they will spin it and like what we've seen the last few years in the lamestream media. So the fourth beast, as for the fourth beast, there shall be a fourth kingdom on the earth, which shall be different from all the kingdoms. Meaning, there's 3 other kingdoms that represent a leopard, a lion, and a bear. And then there's this kingdom. 4 kingdoms at the same time on this earth. And this fourth beast, this fourth kingdom, is going to devour the whole earth and trample it down and break it to pieces. And as for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom, that fourth kingdom, the fourth beast, 10 kings shall arise, and another shall rise after them. He shall be different from the former ones, and shall put down 3 kings. Okay, so we've got that going on. And as I said before, many scholars believe this chapter is a retelling of what Daniel interpreted to Nebuchadnezzar about his dream in Daniel chapter 2. And good thing is, most scholars do believe that the fourth kingdom, the fourth beast that we read about, is that of the Antichrist. But what they show, though, is that it's more of a timeline, just like the helmet of gold, the breastplate, the legs, all that we read about in Daniel 2 is more of a timeline progression leading up to the last kingdom, which is the feet with the 10 toes, which I believe is the Antichrist kingdom. And they're trying to relate that here to Daniel 7, that the first beast that comes and goes is the lion, followed then by the bear, followed by the leopard, and so on and so forth. But what I'm proposing is that all 4 of these kingdoms are going to be on the earth at the same time. And this is when the Antichrist begins to reign. And as I said earlier in my notes, one major reason is that the Antichrist is thrown to the lake of fire. We read about in Revelation, but the other 3 beasts, the other 3 kings are still allowed to live. Well, if they were in the past, whether it's Persia, Rome, Egypt, Babylon, Assyria, whatever those kings were, how did they come back and then they're allowed to live? That doesn't make any sense. And it says, Daniel 7:12, is for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. This kind of gives you an idea what I think could be. It's going to be something like this, I think, where you have basically 4 great beasts or 4 kings that are going to rise out of the earth from among the nations or the peoples. They could be the heads of unions, the European Union, the Asian Union, the African Union, the North American, or just the America's Union. Very well could be. And as I said before, something has to change. And recently the United Nations, they either pass it or they're in the process of passing some type of bill or whatever, that everyone that's a part of the United Nations, which is well over 200 nations around the world, are signing up for this. If there's ever an emergency type of deal where countries are going to lose their sovereignty and they're going to fall under the UN directive, if you will. And so if that happens, then all bets are off. America is no longer a sovereign nation anymore in times of emergencies like pandemics or, whatever. And then verse 24, as for the 10 horns out of this kingdom, so maybe in Asia, there could be 11 kings there. I don't know where this is going to show up. There'll be one that will arise out of that, and that will be the Antichrist. So I just kind of show that there's the 10 horns, the kings, Antichrist comes after they're established. So here he is with the 10. He plucks up 3. So there's 7 horns plus the 1 Antichrist with the power of 3 kings. He takes over. He takes over. Here's our 4 beasts in Daniel 7. I think I showed this a couple weeks ago. We have these 4 beasts, but this one's like a lion, and there's another one like a bear, and one like a leopard, and then that 4th beast that'll be on, that's going to rise up and be among the other 3, is a terrible beast, had 10 horns, and the little horn which plucked 3 horns. Well, we know exactly that's speaking of the Antichrist. And then when the Antichrist gets to be full power in Revelation 13, Daniel talks about it, that we just talked about, the lion, the leopard, and the bear. And here we see them all together. Revelation 13 beast, the 10 kings with the diadems on his head, all that. He is now given full authority over the earth. So he has conquered the kingdom of the lion, the leopard, the bear, and is all one now. It says in Revelation 17:13, these kings have one mind and shall give their power and strength unto the Antichrist, unto the beast. And as I was talking about in Daniel 11, that starting in verse 36, this is definitely talking about the Antichrist, and that this is when he is rising to power, but it's before he receives total control over the earth. It's right before that. And I believe this mortal wound he gets unto death may happen somewhere in the earlier seals, maybe during the war, the conquest, where maybe during war he gets a wound unto death, and maybe there's this resurrection that happens, like a day later he's resurrected, something that will be very astonishing. I have here Daniel 11, there's nothing written concerning the persecution or tribulation of Yahweh's people, but we do see the Antichrist coming up out of the sea, which is a Hebrew idiom for among the peoples of the earth, who received a head wound, and then he was allowed to make war to persecute or to put the saints into tribulation. I'm not going to read all that, but in Daniel 11, there's a part where we read about this Antichrist is going to deal with the strongest fortresses with the help of a foreign god. And that foreign god is a foreign mighty one. It's not El Elyon. It's not the Most High God. It's not Yahweh Elohim. It's not Yeshua HaMashiach, but it is HaSatan. He's going to have help from him, because it says that HaSatan gives him authority and power. He's going to help the Antichrist. And then, as I said before, down at the bottom here, he, being the Antichrist, shall pitch his palatial tents between the sea and the glorious holy mountain. Yeah, well, it's between the seas, plural. The Mediterranean Sea and the Dead Sea on the glorious holy mountain. There's only one glorious holy mountain that God has his eyes on all the time. That is Mount Zion, a.k.a. Jerusalem, and the Temple Mount. And it says, yet he shall come to his end with none to help him. So I'm going to submit to you, as we've been going through Revelation, that these first 5 seals, one possibility, and I just hope and pray that as we've gone through this, I hope I have not come across as dogmatic, because I do not want to be dogmatic unless I'm absolutely certain, and it can be verifiable through 2 or more witnesses. But what I want to submit to you is that the seals 1 through 5 in Revelation 6 is the Antichrist rise to power, his timeline, the sequence of events till he obtains total authority over the earth. So I believe, as we were reading about today, he's going to use, intrigue and deceit. I think this has something to do with the white horse with the rider on there, where he's working his way up among the 10 horns to obtain power. Then he's going to take away peace with the sword, many battles. Maybe he receives his head wound during that time. I don't know. Because of the sword and all these things, there's going to be famine that's going to happen around the earth, followed by death and Hades. And so a quarter of the earth going to be killed through the sword and through famine, pestilence, and wild beasts, which is straight out of Leviticus 26, I believe. I think it's Leviticus 26, the blessing and the curses. These are the curses. If you don't follow God's commandments, if you don't follow what he tells us that we need to be doing, then we're going to succumb. We have to be very careful that we follow what he says, or else we could succumb to these seals, to death and whatnot. And then the fifth seal is the tribulation and martyrdom. And this is when I believe now, Revelation 13, he is now in Jerusalem. He is now up on the Temple Mount. I don't know what that Temple Mount is going to look like. I have some ideas, but I think at the end of the day, he is going to be sitting on the Ark of the Covenant, on the mercy seat, proclaiming himself as God. And then at that point, the tribulation is going to happen. The fallen angels have come onto the earth, just as the fig tree blows in the wind and its unripe figs fall to the ground, aka Revelation 12, war in heaven. Satan and his angels fought. They lost. They're on earth. Persecution of the saints begin at that timeline. Even before that, but nothing like what we're going to see when the fifth seal is cracked open. So here's kind of an idea with prophetic layers, timelines. We read through a little bit of it today. Revelation 6, the green is the early career, the early career of the Antichrist. So Revelation 6, those first three seals here, the fourth seal destroying a quarter of the earth, and the fifth seal, martyrdom of the saints. This is before he takes total power. In Daniel 11, what I read to you today, 36 through 45, I believe what Daniel was shown is where the Antichrist is at in his role as king of the earth. This is the middle to late career. Verse 44 and 45, it talks about the Antichrist going out with great fury to destroy and devote many to destruction. Yet the Antichrist shall come to his end with no one to help him. Then we also have Matthew 24. Yeshua talks about the wars, the famine, the tribulation. These deal with the seals. He talks about the false prophets in Revelation 13:11. What we read a couple of weeks ago with the rise of the Antichrist. There's also a false prophet that comes up. The gospel is proclaimed by the angelic beings over the earth. The two witnesses begin to give their 1260-day testimony. And then we also have the abomination of desolation spoken about in Daniel that Yeshua references in Matthew 24, verse 15. Daniel 7, I don't believe I read that, but talking about the four beasts, the fourth one being the little horn. But what we read today, Daniel 7, talks about the mid to late career of the Antichrist when the fourth beast becomes a unified kingdom. What we just read about a couple weeks ago in Revelation 13, because we read here in Revelation 13, the beast has all the horns. Kingdom is his, and Satan gives all the authority to the Antichrist. This just gives you another prophetic layer timeline. When Yeshua was talking to his disciples, he was speaking bride terminology. He wasn't going into the wrath of God and all those things. He's speaking of the bride, that the bride is going to see the Antichrist rise to power, the false prophet, the height of the Antichrist power, and the persecution of the saints, the tribulation. When we read Revelation 6 through 8, we get this similar timeline to what Yeshua was talking about in Matthew 24. I believe also Luke 21 and Mark 13. There's a similar timeline here. The Antichrist rises to power. Then we see the height of the Antichrist power and the persecution of the saints, but not the end. In Daniel 11, the Antichrist is almost at the height of his power, and we see that there's this head wound that he receives unto death. I think there's a false resurrection that happens there. Daniel 7, the beginning part, kind of gives the Antichrist rise to power. But today we focus more on the later verses at the height of the Antichrist power and the tribulation of the saints. So many things are showing up here with his rise to power and then the tribulation of the saints. And then the end is 726, that he will come to his end. And then Revelation 13 that we read about 2 weeks ago, the height of his power and the tribulation of his saints. So it's kind of what you get on the timeline in different sections, spoken of by Yeshua, spoken of by either Yeshua or an angel to Daniel, and what we see later that John was given. And I think that's the end of the slideshow. I think what I'm going to do real quick is go in, give me 2 more minutes, and we're going to read again just the beginning of Revelation 13. Again, and I, John, stood upon the sand of the sea and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns. So remember, there were 7 kings left. 7 kings left that had, because there were 10 kings that had 10 crowns, but he took out 3 of them. And so he has 7 kings with the 10 crowns. They all give him the power. And the beast I saw was like unto, a leopard, which is one of the kingdoms. And his feet were as the feet of a bear. That's of another kingdom. And his mouth is the mouth of a lion, a third kingdom. And the dragon gave him his power and his seat and great authority. So he has all the kingdoms now. It's just like when Satan was testing Yeshua for 40 days in the wilderness, and he said, hey, all these kingdoms are given to me, and I can give them to whoever I want, freely give, if you would just bow and worship me. And Satan would have Yeshua would have none of it. He would have none of it because he said no. But here the Antichrist, he does bow, and he is given the authority from HaSatan, from the dragon. And I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. Again, this is before he starts totally reigning. He's here. Now they're worshiping the dragon, which gave power unto the beast. So they're worshiping Satan and they're worshiping the Antichrist. And they're saying, who's unlike the beast and who's able to make war with him? Why were they having trouble to make war with him? Because the Antichrist is trusting in a foreign god, a foreign mighty one. He's putting his trust and hope in Satan, and Satan is giving him all the authority and power to overcome anyone. So I think I'm going to leave it at that. This gives you a little bit something to chew on. Your homework assignment, if you choose, is to go back and read those same verses I read in Daniel 2, Daniel 7, Daniel 8. You can go in and read Daniel 9 if you want, Daniel 11, and part of Daniel 12. As I have mentioned this guy a couple times in the past, I've had this book for a couple years. This is Daniel. It's a commentary by Chris White. I think he does a fabulous job. There's a lot in here that I can concur with. Some things maybe not, but that's where everyone's at in this. You know, we don't have all the information. He makes some very good insights into the book of Daniel and how it relates to the Antichrist, Mystery Babylon, and so on and so forth. So I hope and pray that this study was enlightening and that you got something out of it. And as I said before, hit like, subscribe, and please put your comments below. One thing I'm going to say real quick, we have a website. It is www.returnofthерemnant, all one word, returnotheremnant.com. We are looking at possibly moving that domain to another web host. And if we do, it may be down for a little while until I get it set up the way that I need to. So you got another week or so to access that. There's a lot of teachings, PowerPoints, audio on there. But for the most part, I've been really trying to focus on getting teachings out on YouTube. And I will probably start exploring other platforms like maybe Rumble and some others. So anyway, I hope this was a blessing to you. Until we meet again, may you have a great Sabbath. We'll see you soon. Shalom.